Hey there, so the title of this video is Golden Age Bodybuilders Were Ketogenic. And before I get into the evidence that actually shows this, I'm going to explain a few things in this video, like what actually is a requirement for muscle growth, how that occurs, and also the fat-adapted ketogenic metabolism. So I'm going to explain all that, but before I get into that, I just want to say my name is Anthony Romano. I've been doing the ketogenic diet and bodybuilding for 7 years, and I've done just about everything right and everything wrong you can do with this diet. So anyways, on to the video. So, Golden Age bodybuilders were ketogenic. Now, this is going to apply for most of them. However, at most, I'm going to say that, some Golden Age bodybuilders, they would incorporate some carbohydrates, around workout times, but for the most part, during the cut, it's very easy to say that almost all of them were ketogenic. And this is because overall, you got to remember, calorie counting was not really a thing in the Golden Age era. Also because there was no way to adequately count your calories. There was no calorie counters, there was no MyFitnessPal. Even if you weighed your food, there was no way to know the variance between one name brand and another, and overall there was no community to allow for adequate and accurate calorie counting. My actual approach for optimal fat loss relies on a mix of calorie counting and ketosis, but I'm going to explain the fat-adapted keto metabolism. So the fat-adapted keto metabolism basically is a state where your body is able to use fat for energy and any carbs you throw into your body, and it's going to use them very effectively. So this applies for muscle growth even during a calorie deficit. So when you think about the approaches the Golden Era bodybuilders took, which predominantly revolved around limiting and restricting their carbohydrates, because in their view, most people at that time thought that fat loss was determined and had a very strong relationship with your carb consumption, which it does in some way, but it doesn't mean that carbs are the devil. It's just that they are a luxury energy source that humans have been using, however scarce they've been popping up until nowadays, where we can go to the supermarket and pick up a bag of oats, or Twinkies, whatever. So if you want to know what an actual Golden Age bodybuilding plan looked like in terms of nutrition, it was predominantly lots of red meats, lots of fish, eggs, protein sources, some vegetables thrown around in there, but it really would revolve around the red meats, and you wouldn't be it wouldn't be out of the ordinary to hear about bodybuilders who would consume large amounts of steak every day, lots of eggs, and even ridiculous numbers of eggs. And actually one of the most popular bodybuilding cutting diets was the steak and eggs diet by Vince Gironda. So if you don't know who Vince Gironda was, he was a trainer who trained a lot of the Golden Era bodybuilders, and this guy was so strict with his methods that if you didn't listen to them, he would basically kick you out of his gym and he would stop training you. So of the people we do know that were trained by Vince Gironda, that includes Arnold Schwarzenegger, Larry Scott. He even trained some famous actors like Sylvester Stallone, Carl Weathers, who was Apollo Creed in Rocky. But there were a lot of famous people that were trained by this guy, and they all followed his methods, or else he would kick them out. And this guy is often looked at as like a genius. He really was way ahead of the curve for a lot of bodybuilding knowledge and nutrition knowledge that we have nowadays. However, a lot of the cutting plans, you can Google as many as you want, they're all going to have restricted carbohydrates. So I can say with certainty that all of the Golden Era cutting plans were certainly based around ketosis, whether they knew it or not at the time. A lot of their bulking plans had strategic uses of carbohydrates, but they still followed the same high fat, high protein approach. Now, you don't necessarily need high fat in a keto diet, as I've said many times, but it is optimal for how you feel, and if you're trying to grow muscle at the same time, it's going to allow you to get more vitamins, more nutrients, and also increase your hormone levels, because fat is important for keeping your hormone levels adequate. Now, for the cutting plans, like I said, you can look up any of them. They're not going to have a large amount of carbs. If there were any bodybuilders who did use carbohydrates during a cut, I guarantee you it will go like this. They'll have, a large serving of red meat and eggs in the morning, And then before their workout, maybe they consume a small bowl of oats or rice. And the thing is, when you have guys who have metabolisms as fast as 200 plus pound golden era bodybuilders, when they're cutting, their whole philosophy was, okay, we'll do more reps. So they're basically having a cardio-like effect, because they wouldn't really do Stairmaster or any other treadmill cardio. It was very rare to see that. And you would see larger emphasis on reps, less emphasis on, one rep maxes. And overall, these guys would still be hitting heavy ass weights despite the lack of carbohydrates. Now that might be rocking your world a little bit here, but here's the deal. When you have such a high metabolism as these men would, what's going to happen is your body's going to get into a state of fat adaptation a lot quicker. So fat adaptation is a state where your body, like I said, is able to use fat basically all throughout the day and save the small amounts of carbs that it gets from vegetables and excess protein, which these guys would have been consuming a large amount of, and it'll convert those extra proteins into carbohydrates to store in the muscle. So once they're stored in your muscles, you can still hit a 300-pound bench if you're Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 70s, despite not having any carbohydrates that you're actually consuming. Now, the way this actually works in terms of body fat loss would be the restriction of carbohydrates would make you enter ketosis. Because of their metabolism, because of just their eating style and the cuts lasting several months, they would definitely be fat adapted. Now, their strength would remain the same, and you don't hear anything about golden era bodybuilders ever having a lack of strength. In fact, they were probably known for having larger amounts of strength, which I think is due to the higher amount of fat-soluble vitamins from the fat sources they were eating, because red meats and steaks and eggs and whatnot are very high in not only fat-soluble vitamins, but the types of proteins that get into your muscle right away. So this is going to be your leucine and other branching amino acids. So when you're eating large amounts of eggs, because some of these diets, they would not have any restriction at all. It would literally be eat as much steak and eggs as you want all day. That would literally be the diet plan. And because calorie counting wasn't even possible at the time, the fat burning benefits of ketosis would basically be what got these guys as lean as they could. Now, we don't see a lot of golden era bodybuilders getting really, really shredded and diced, right? If you look at bodybuilders nowadays, they're a lot leaner. And I think this is due to, of course, the ability to count calories, right? Because calories are the primary driver of fat loss. But if these men had access to both, carb restriction and calorie counting, then I absolutely think they would have been in even better condition than we see nowadays. However, that was just not possible. That is the approach I advocate for. However, for these guys, that wasn't really their thing. They got all these results simply from restricting their carbohydrates. Now, I'll make another video on the steak and eggs diet. But one thing I want to hammer home here is you don't need to be afraid of fats in your food. A lot of the macro-based diets of 2019 advocate that you need to lower your fats. And this is actually kind of counterintuitive to fat loss, because even though you might think that eating more fat will make you get fat, that's actually not true. Every time you're burning fat, your body is pulling from saturated animal fat. That's what it's pulling from. So eating more of it and basically eliminating those carbohydrates is getting your body into a state where it's ready to burn animal fat at all times. So it is going to be more optimal for your body to enter this state if you're consuming decent amounts of animal fat. Besides that, animal fat is where all the nutrition is stored in animals. That's why we store fat. It helps us store these fat-soluble vitamins. Fat-soluble vitamins are A, E, D, and K, and they all have a hormonal effect on your body. So if you are lower in calories, one of the worst things you're going to want to do is keep your fats low, because that's basically going to not only malnourish your body in terms of energy, but it's going to make it a lot harder to get nutrition in as well. And these fat-soluble vitamins play such a large role, like I said, in the hormonal side of things, but you also have to think about when it comes to testosterone specifically. So not only are these fat-soluble vitamins, play an anabolic role, but you have to think about cholesterol. So healthy cholesterol is what your body needs to produce testosterone. Every cell in your body is made of cholesterol. And it's a myth that I always like to roast, because I always say the food industry wants you to be more afraid of 10 eggs than 10 Oreos. When if you think about it, if you're doing a macro diet just so you can squeeze in a couple extra Oreos, think about nutritionally how much of a difference it would be if you got the same number of Oreos as you did eggs. And that's really what these golden age bodybuilders were doing. They were getting larger amounts of eggs, larger amounts of these fatty but protein dense foods. And this is the main key, because the only driver of muscle growth in your body, well, one of the main drivers is a pathway called mTOR. So mTOR controls all the protein synthesis in your body, and the only thing you need to stimulate it is insulin. So insulin is a storage hormone, but you can stimulate large amounts of it if you eat carbohydrates, and that's why people will typically tell you you need carbs in order to build muscle. It's actually not the carbs, it's the insulin. And insulin can actually be stimulated adequately by protein consumption, especially if you're consuming large amounts of it, as these golden age bodybuilders would. We know their plans, we know that they weren't eating, large amounts of carbs. If they did, it was during the bulk, and they would put it around the workout times. Even in that case, after about 30 minutes of training, especially for these guys and how hard they would train, those carbohydrates would already be used up, and their body would be, assuming they were fat adapted, would hop right back into burning fat for energy. This is where the sweet spot really is, and that's where you kind of want to get to if you're trying to do a ketogenic bodybuilding plan, which I have plenty of other videos about. But as far as these guys are concerned, the dense animal meats was the entirety of their diet. And although that might not necessarily be what's most practical for nowadays, large amounts of animal fats is going to be the key for not only the hormonal effects, the cholesterol effects, and a great source of protein, but in terms of your energy needs. Carbohydrates are not your only energy need, and if you follow a plan like these golden age bodybuilders, you'll see that they were very low in carbohydrate. It's not something you need for energy, it's not something you need for muscle growth. And here's another little distinction. So even when you're in a calorie restriction, your body is lower in energy. However, if your body is getting most of its energy, even in the restriction of calories, from fats are more dense calorically. So if you are in a fat adapted state, your body's still going to have a large amount of energy to use, even if you're in several hundred calorie deficit. Additionally, being in this fat burning state allows you to pull from energy all throughout your entire body at all times, where there's thousands and thousands of calories stored. And this is where most of the fat burning effects would come of these golden age bodybuilders. It's funny because nowadays the whole approach is completely different, but because it's based off the if it fits your macros approach. And not only does that not really account for nutrition, but it very much deviates from what would actually put your body in a fat burning mode. So even though we have the luxury of the ability to count calories, if you want a plan that is golden age based and based off of these classic bodybuilders, really you should be following a ketogenic approach. I have plenty of videos on it, but the main thing you need to take away is these guys were fat adapted, not only because of how quickly they would go through any small amount of carbs they would consume, not only because we have proof of what they would eat, that it was mostly these animal meats and animal products that were high in fat and high in protein, but also that any carbohydrates they consumed would be used up, their body would be fat adapted, partially due to how fast their metabolism was, just as a result of being so massive. But overall, these guys were still able to hit gnarly weights that you see on these documentaries, and you never hear them complain once about dieting. You never hear them complain once about eating different foods. They probably wouldn't even change their foods up. All they would do was change their training. They would focus more on the repetitions, which would actually be most of like their cardio, because these guys didn't even really do cardio. That's also partially why they weren't as ripped to shreds as they could be, because they weren't able to not only count their calories, but incorporate cardio in a way that would affect their caloric intake. So this is an intro to how golden age bodybuilders would use the ketogenic diet, even though they might not have necessarily classified it as that at the time, because even if they were having some carbs, those would be used up and they'd hop back into a keto state. So you can also learn more about that on my targeted ketogenic diet video, which I made revolve around TJ Dillashaw, UFC fighter. So overall, if you want to learn more about classic bodybuilding and how it used the ketogenic diet, I'm going to be making many more videos on this. This is actually what I want to be the centerpiece of my page here. I want to bring bodybuilding into a new area because I use the ketogenic diet myself. I use it for bodybuilding. I've seen my strength go up as I've been cutting, even in a 1,000 calorie deficit, and my strength doesn't take any hit. A lot of these studies will tell you that it will. However, none of the studies are done on fat adapted individuals, except for the ones that show positive results. So if you'd like to learn more, my name is Anthony Romano. Leave me a comment, find me on Instagram, DM me. I will get back to you as soon as I can. But overall, I hope this video has benefited you and educated you more on classic bodybuilding, and keto fat adaptation. Thank you very much for watching. Peace.